Hello everybody, welcome to first session on Linux. Let's start learning Linux. Now let us understand basic question of what is Linux. We can say in simple Linux is a operating system which sits in middle of hardware and users. What does that mean? Let's say we have users or we have applications. Now there is a server hardware or a system hardware. What will be there in hardware? Like you have CPU, memory, and storage. These are the three main components in a hardware. Now, if your user requests for any logical operations, it has to be performed by your hardware. But unfortunately, your hardware does not understand the language that your user understands. Then we need a layer in between that takes a request from users or from apps and then executes on the hardware. Once it executes, it will show the results to either users or apps. Who does this function? That is done by operating system. So we can simply say Linux is a operating system which sits in the middle of your hardware and the users. There are also like a lot of other operating systems which one we are very familiar is with Windows also does the same thing, so that is a Windows operating system. Now when you go into the Unix world or Linux world, you will hear two terms majorly. One is called as Unix, second one is called as Linux. Now let us try to understand what is difference between Unix and Linux. Now, Unix is also an operating system that is first developed for what? For multi-user and to do multitasking. That means you can run parallel tasks at the same time. Okay. Now, it is invented in 1790s in Bell Labs by ATT, GE in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. After that, much later in 1990s, there's a guy by name Linus Tornaldos has developed his own kernel and named it as Linux. Now Linux is mostly free except for some distributions. We'll discuss what are distributions in later. And it is also called as open source. Now what is the meaning of open source? Now let's say if I develop some code and publish to everybody, you can take that base code, modify that for your requirements. Okay. And am I charging anything for the base code? I'm not charging anything. So the Linux is an open source. Anybody can take the source code and make some modifications or add some features and create their own operating system. Okay. Now, on the other hand, we also have Unix. Unix is mostly used uh, by Sun. Okay, they have an operating system by name Solaris. That is a Unix-based operating system. There's an operating system called as HPUX. That is also Unix-based operating system. Okay, IBM AIX. So they have taken the Unix code and developed some features on top of that, and they sell in the market. Okay. Now, on the other hand, Linux is used by many developers communities and companies, and there are different versions of Linux. One is called as a Red Hat, CentOS, Debian, etc. Okay, these are the different distributions of Linux. Now, if I have to compare Unix with Linux, Unix supports a very few file systems. It does not have support for a lot of file systems. Now, Linux supports a lot of file systems. Now, what is a file system? We'll discuss that in the upcoming chapters. Now, Linux can be installed on a different variety of hardwares. It could be mobile phones, it could be tablets, or it could be any other computers. Okay, that's what a small comparison between Unix and Linux. Now, as I told you, there are different distributions of Linux. One of the distribution is called as a Red Hat Linux. Now, Red Hat is a company which has taken the Linux source code, added some features on top of it, and if you install Red Hat on your server, is it going to be free? No, it's not going to be free because Red Hat offers you support. Okay, so Red Hat Linux, it's not free. You have to pay for support based on whatever plan that you have with Red Hat. Similarly, there are other distributions of Linux. Second one is called as CentOS, Fedora, SUSE, Debian, and Ubuntu. These are the different distributions of Linux that we have in the market for enterprise applications. All right. Now let us try to compare Linux operating system with Windows operating system. So now one comparison is straight away. Linux is free, whereas Windows, is it free? Windows is charged. It's not free. You have to purchase the license. But Linux, if you go for some distributions like Red Hat Linux, they are charged. Now Windows is very user friendly, where you have a simple UI where you can drag, drop, and do a lot of options with the UI, which is very user friendly. But Linux does not have a very fancy UI. So you have to run a lot of commands uh, from the terminal or from the console. We'll understand what is a terminal, what is a console in the next session. But Linux is very reliable and it runs really for a long time. It does not require much reboots. But for Windows, you have to often reboot if you install a new software, if you install a new program. Okay, all the softwares, most of them are enterprise level softwares on Linux. Windows has much larger selection of softwares. Now, if you ask for multitasking, which OS is better? Is it Linux or Windows? So the answer would be Linux. Linux is the best for multitasking. Windows, it takes huge amount of memory and resource if you have to do multitasking. And if you compare the security, Linux is a very secured when you compare with Windows. And as I told you, Linux is open for public, and Windows is not an open source, it is charged. Okay, that is a little bit introduction about Linux. What is Linux? What is an operating system? And in the next chapter, we will see how to start working with the Linux operating system. Okay, thank you very much for joining the session. See you guys in the next session.